Volvo has committed to going fully electric by 2030, and that means we're going to be seeing a lot more cars from the Recharge line. This is the Volvo XC40 Recharge, and it's essentially Volvo's first fully electric car. It may look like a bog standard XC40, but there's a lot going on here that you want to know about, including the fact that it makes over 400 horsepower. Welcome to Evo India and welcome to our review of the Volvo XC40 Recharge. But before we get into the details of things, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the Evo India channel because I promise you we will put this up against other electric vehicles in a comparison test, and let us know, do you think the Indian market is ready for small luxury electric cars like the XC40 Recharge? Let's start with the exterior styling of the Volvo XC40, and on the face of it, it's a very familiar design. This looks very similar to the standard XC40. The face is the same, the headlamps are the same, the Thor's hammer element in the headlamps are the same. The only real difference is to the grille. Here you've got a blanked out panel instead of the grille because there are no radiators behind this, and you've got the green number plate, which obviously indicates that this is an EV. When you come around to the side, again, the changes are very subtle. You'll notice new 19-inch wheels. You'll notice a small Recharge badge on the C-pillar, but that's about it. And at the rear, again, the changes are very subtle. You'll notice a Recharge badge at the rear. The Volvo lettering is where you'd usually expect it to be, and no tailpipes. But apart from that, this Volvo XC Recharge is very similar to the standard XC40. And Volvo has probably intentionally retain that familiarity. They don't want to make a very massive jump when shifting from ICE to EV, and therefore they've retained the styling while completely revamping the drivetrain. Now let's talk about the interiors of the XC40 Recharge. Overall, it's very familiar to the standard XC40. The only real difference is in here. The digital cluster has some different readouts to let you know that this is an EV. For example, there's no fuel gauge, but instead you have a gauge which tells you how much % of battery you have left. Mind you, it doesn't tell you the range, it just tells you how much battery you have left in percentage. If you want to see the range, you have to look at it on the screen in the center. Apart from that, it's got a dial that replaces the tacho, and this dial tells you how much power you're using or you're regenerating, and that's really useful when you're driving down the road and you want to pay attention to how much regen you're getting. Apart from that, the rest of the dash is very familiar. You've got this portrait-oriented tablet right in the center of the car, and this is something that we've seen on the S90 and on the XC60 earlier. It's got Google natively running on it. It's got a bunch of Google apps, so you've got Maps, you've got Spotify, you've got YouTube Music, you've also got the Play Store to download other apps. And if you're an Apple user, fret not, when the XC40 Recharge launches in India, it will also have wireless Apple CarPlay, so Apple users are taken care of and don't have to worry about the fact that this is a Google system. Apart from that, fit and finish levels, top notch. Everything feels really solid. Everything that you touch, all the buttons, all the dials, everything feels really well put together. All the surfaces, even the plastics, feel very high quality. And that's really nice because this is going to be an expensive car, so it should feel expensive. Apart from that, on the features front, the XC40 Recharge comes fairly well loaded. You've got seats with a memory function over here, you've got Harman Kardon audio, you've got a massive panoramic sunroof, you've got a 360-degree camera, wireless phone charger, a lot of stuff packed into the XC40 Recharge. One thing you need to note, these seats will not be on the car that will be sold in India later this year. This is leather, but when the car launches, they will be launched with a leather-free interior. Another step that Volvo is taking towards sustainability in addition to just the electric drivetrain. When talking about the back seat, the first thing you'll notice is how narrow the door aperture is. It's a little narrow and it's a little difficult to get into unless you're thin or athletic. So that's something you need to be wary of. But once you're inside, things get better. You've got a good amount of room over here. Knee room is more than adequate. You've got decent headroom as well. It's scooped out over here to make space for your head, and it's just about enough. I'm 5'10" and I'm fairly comfortable in this back seat. If I do have a complaint, it's that this seat, it feels a little too short and the floor is too high. So together, they make you feel like you've got not too much under thigh support. That's not a nice feeling. The good thing is this seat is mounted fairly high up, so I can actually put my feet underneath the driver's seat and stretch out a little bit. That improves things over here. In addition to that, you've got two AC vents for the back. You can control the flow of the AC, but not the temperature. You don't have a separate climate control zone over here. Below that, you've got two USB Type-C slots, and you've got an armrest with cup holders. Overall, the back seat, it's a fairly comfortable place to be. It's a great place to chuck your kids into. It's a great place for adults to be for heading around the city on short drives, but I don't think it's going to be too comfortable for adults on really long drives. It's worth talking about the amount of boot space that the XC40 Recharge has. You've got 452 liters of space over here, so you can pack in a fair bit of stuff, but you need to be mindful of the fact that the spare or the space saver is mounted on top of the boot floor. So this makes it a little inconvenient to take in and out stuff, and it eats into room a little bit. But apart from that, you've got a fair bit of space. We've got a fair bit of camera equipment in here without a problem. But there is a bonus. Because this is an EV, you've got a frunk at the front, and you can put in, I don't know, your charging cables and a lot of other stuff in the front as well. Okay, before we start driving, I need to show you something really cool. There's no start-stop button on the Volvo XC40 Recharge. It just senses that you're in the car and gets off. The logic being that this is an EV, you don't have to start or stop any sort of engine here. So you get into the car, you put your foot on the brake, you pull it into drive, and it's ready to move. It's really simple, and it's the same for getting out. When you want to stop, you just put it into park, open the door, and the car turns off. It's really intuitive, really simple. There's no waiting for the car to be ready or anything of the sort. Hit drive, you're ready to go. Now, let's talk specs. This car has a 78 kilowatt hour battery pack. That's a fairly large battery pack, and that battery pack comes mated to two electric motors, one on the front axle, one on the rear axle. Each motor makes 201 bhp, and that gives it a total system output of 402 bhp, which is absolutely insane. Torque is mad as well, 660 Nm, and overall performance is just mind-blowing. I mean, this is over 400 horsepower in such a small car. Sure, it's heavy, it's got a lot of batteries and stuff like that, but it's still a very fast car. So when you get on the gas, it's fast, it's really fast. All 400 horsepower, all 660 Nm of torque come at you all at once. Remember, this has all-wheel drive, so it's not limited by traction in any sense. The tires are really good as well, P0s, so it really puts down all of that power into the road and sends you flying forward. It's really fast. The claimed 0 to 100 time is 4.9 seconds, under 5 seconds, and that's a number I will genuinely believe without testing the car. And of course, being an electric, it's completely silent while being so lethal, so there's absolutely no sound. Okay, at rolling speeds, if you've got the window down, you can hear a slight whirring. That's the pedestrian warning system, which is to alert other people around the car that there is an electric car moving around close by. But once you pick up speed, there's nothing. You can hear a little bit of road noise, and that's about it. A little bit of road noise, a little bit of wind noise, and absolute silence as you fly across the road. It's insane how much performance there is. You know, you just stab the throttle and within a matter of seconds you're into triple digit speeds. And traditionally with EVs, what happens is once you hit high speeds, once you hit 100, 120, that acceleration tapers off, but not with the XC40 Recharge. Slam the throttle down at 120 and it will accelerate brutally even at that speed. Now, the top speed is limited to 180 kilometers an hour. That's Volvo's blanket speed limit for all its road cars. So don't expect anything more than that. But doing anything more than that on our roads is also just ridiculous and dangerous. So it's not something you should be worried about. But that acceleration, that sheer grunt that it has is unbelievable. To think that this is supposed to be a family car that's designed for city driving and occasional short trips. It's got 400 horsepower. What family car has 400 horsepower? My God, this is just... It's not even pretending to be a sporty car. It's just a car with a lot of power. That's it. Now, the Volvo XC40 has no real drive modes. There's an off-road drive mode which you have to really dig through the menus to find. And I guess that just optimizes the drivetrain for low traction situations. But apart from that, there's no real drive modes. You can adjust the steering weight, there is a setting to do that and make it heavier, and that's something I did. As soon as I got into the car just felt a lot nicer with that heavier steering wheel. Something that's really interesting is the one pedal driving mode. Now, what happens in the normal standard mode is that when you accelerate, it accelerates as usual, but when you let off the gas, it essentially just coasts. So there's no real deceleration that's happening, and it's just coasting along with its own momentum. And if there's a slope, if it's downhill, it will pick up speed. If it's an uphill slope, it will decelerate. It's essentially just coasting, right? But there's something called the one pedal driving mode in here, and if you activate that, what essentially happens is as soon as you let off the throttle, it decelerates and it starts slowing down, and if you leave it for long enough, it will bring the car to a complete halt. So essentially you can drive the car with one pedal. What you need to do is just judge traffic, anticipate well, and when you need to slow down, just let off the gas and the car will automatically slow down. This deceleration is fairly aggressive. It's more aggressive than many of the other EVs that I have experienced. And that can make it a little unnerving for passengers, because if the driver's not really smooth with his inputs on the throttle pedal, it can get a little jerky. It can cause a sort of head toss effect, but that's upon the driver and the driver's driving style. With a little bit of finesse, you can smoothen that out and make it a very effective driving mode. What it allows you to do is regenerate energy faster, because every time you're decelerating, you're essentially drawing current back into the battery and charging the battery slowly, and that can extend your range a little bit. What I do wish Volvo had added was steps in the regeneration, so it just didn't have this one aggressive step. I wish I had the ability to adjust how much regeneration I wanted. Many of the other cars allow you to do so. Even more affordable stuff like the MG, the Kona EV, they all allow you to adjust how aggressive you want the regeneration to be, and that as a driver allows you to control a little bit more of the driving experience. But as I've said many times before, when I'm writing or talking about Volvos, Volvo essentially wants to remove you from the driving experience. It doesn't want you to make too many decisions about it. So what you've got to do is just pick your driving mode, whether you like it in the normal mode or whether you like it in the one pedal mode, and just go with it. Yeah, there's no breaking your head about adjusting the levels of regen or anything of the sort. Before I move on to the ride and handling, I also want to talk about the range. Now, Volvo claims 461 kilometers on the WLTP cycle, and today we've been honestly driving it a lot on the highways. And on the highways, what we found in the real world is about 350 kilometers, right? That's while doing high speeds. That's you're doing 100, 120 kilometers now on the highway. You're accelerating hard to overtake slow-moving trucks. So with that sort of usage, you're getting 350 kilometers an hour. I suspect if you limit yourself to the city, if you keep your one pedal driving on, if you drive a little efficiency, you can definitely stretch that over 400 kilometers. So in terms of range, this thing is very sorted. You've got a good amount of range to back you up. 400 kilometers makes this genuinely very usable in the real world. You can do intercity runs without trouble. The ability to charge it on the go, if you've got a DC fast charger, just makes that all the more easier. And it makes it a really versatile car. Now this is how you charge the XC40 Recharge. Extremely straightforward. Let's talk charging times. On a DC fast charger at 150 kilowatts, this charges from 10 to 80% in just 33 minutes. With the car, you also get an 11 kilowatt wall box, and that charges the car in approximately 7 hours. So this charges up fairly quickly, and if you find a proper fast charger, you can get it juiced up very quick. Now let's talk ride and handling. I'm actually very impressed by the ride quality of this car. I wasn't expecting it. This car is riding on large 19-inch wheels. This car is a very heavy car, and it's a European car at the end of the day. So I expected it to ride like a European car would. I expected it to be stiff. I expected it to be uncomfortable, but that's not the case. The Volvo XC40 Recharge actually deals with our roads really well. So if you've got a bumpy patch up ahead, you can just flatten it out. You don't have to slow down too much. If you've got undulations in the road, doesn't bother the XC40 Recharge. Bad roads, Indian roads, typical Indian roads do not phase the XC40 Recharge. It's actually very well composed and stays very, very planted. and it soaks up the bumps very effectively, making it a really good car for our roads. Another thing worth noting is the ground clearance. It's got 175 mm of ground clearance. Now what happens a lot of times with these EVs is because the battery pack's in the floor, it eats into ground clearance. But with the XC40, they've managed to salvage a fair amount of it. 175 mm is really good, and we've had some nasty speed breakers today. It hasn't bothered the XC40 at all. Nowhere has it touched, nowhere has it even come close to touching. So you can actually genuinely drive this car in India without trouble. I remember when we drove the Mercedes-Benz EQC for the first time, it really shocked us with how low the ground clearance was. It claims to be an SUV, but it doesn't have SUV-like ground clearance, and that made it really difficult to drive around in India. But this, you have no such trouble over here. When it comes to the ride quality though, I do have one criticism of it, and it's that when you're going over really bumpy patches, you can hear a little bit of the suspension into the cabin. Now you need to remember that this is an EV, so it's completely silent. There's no engine noise drowning out the little rattles and squeaks that are happening while it's going over bad roads. Many EVs, something like an Audi e-tron, are really well damped, and you don't hear too much of in the cabin. But with the Volvo XC40, it does allow a little bit of that into the cabin. Now coming to handling, does this car handle? Honestly, it does a good job of it, but it's not spectacular. Alright, it's got the fundamentals right, it's got its weight in the floor, it's got a well-balanced chassis, and it turns well. You know, when you turn it into a corner, there's a good amount of grip at the front end, it's got good tires, and it will turn well. There is some degree of roll, and what I find lacking on the handling front is just the engagement. It feels a little sterile. You feel a little bit disconnected from the whole experience, so it doesn't really get you involved in the driving. But it's a very effective handler, if that's what you're asking. You know, it will corner hard, it will corner fast, and it will corner well. It's just not a very emotional experience. There's not too much feedback from the steering wheel, there's not too much feedback from the chassis, so you're left to guess what's going on underneath you, but have faith in the fact that this thing can corner and it will perform well. We've been driving it on this road up and down here, and it's been very enthusiastic. And understeer does come in fairly late. It's not like it just descends into understeer at the first sight of a corner. It will corner, it will grip, and that makes it a really enjoyable. It also makes it a really versatile car, because you can drive it like a city car, which is what it's meant to do. But then when you want to smoke somebody at the traffic lights, you can do that. You have 402 horsepower. And when you want to go cornering or driving in the hills, it will engage. Not in the most enthusiastic way, but it will allow you to have a quick blast around the hills without the chassis tying itself in knots. Overall, what do I think of the Volvo XC40? I think it's a really interesting proposition. Just think about what it stands for, right? It's this small, compact SUV, but it's got huge power, right? It's got the same amount of power as an EQC, as an e-tron. In fact, this drivetrain is shared with the Polestar 2, this 402 bhp drivetrain. So it's got serious firepower underneath this chassis. And yet it doesn't look like it does. It looks so unassuming. Somebody's going to see the green plate and say, hey, what the hell? This guy is some sort of environmentalist fanboy that wants to take care of the environment. But this thing can smoke sports cars off the line. It's genuinely a very good performance car. And at the same time, it provides you luxury. Everything in here is very well put together. Everything in here feels very high quality. And that makes it a very complete car. I think its only downfall is the fact that it has a small footprint. Now, we don't know the prices yet, but I suspect it will be fairly expensive, and it will be close to stuff like the EQC and the e-tron and the likes. So those are cars that offer a much larger footprint, a lot more presence, and in that sense, the Volvo XC40 loses out. But as a car, wow, this is really, really impressive. It's an EV that I've actually enjoyed spending time with. And Volvo being Volvo, you've also got a crazy amount of safety packed into this. Of course, this has a radar-enabled safety system. So you've got front radars, you've got rear radars. That gives you adaptive cruise control, it gives you lane change assist, it gives you a blind spot monitor. It's a whole suite of active and passive safety aids that make Volvos so safe. And honestly, in India, I find it just easier to turn all of those off because our traffic is so chaotic that the car occasionally just emergency brakes when you're not expecting it, even though you're in control. So it depends on you. If that's something you enjoy, if that safety suite is something that you'd like to have, the Volvo has it. But the good thing is you have the option of turning it all off from the screen over here. Bookings for the XC40 Recharge will start only in July 2022 and deliveries will happen in October, which is a fair bit of time away. In the meantime, we can only speculate about the prices, and I suspect the XC40 will be a fairly expensive car. You see, it packs a lot of tech. You've got that large battery, you've got 2 motors, you've got a lot of power on tap, and as a consequence of that, you've got bigger wheels, bigger tires, bigger brakes, and all of that costs money. So I suspect this may be costing around rupees 75 lakhs when it launches in India. That puts it dangerously close to stuff like the e-tron, the I-Pace, and the Mercedes-Benz EQC, which are all much larger SUVs, but it is smaller, and many might find that to be a disadvantage because they won't have the presence that the other cars have. But if you're going to be driving it in the city, honestly, that small footprint might just be an advantage. The Volvo, it's got a lot going for it. It's fast, it's cool, it's desirable, it's funky, it's very well rounded, and it's very suitable for Indian conditions. So in that sense, it's a really good car to have in your garage if you are looking for an electric. A lot of the success of the Volvo will depend on what it's priced at.